Well, Bob, I should coffee out of that. I had a young man about 6 months ago who I'm very happy and honored, and I hope he feels the same way, to say he's my friend. He has had an unbelievable career as a pilot and as a human being. I think he's done more since he's retired than he actually did in World War II, which I can't even believe myself. But I'm going to have him come up here in a second. There are a few things that he's going to be doing in a few months. He's going to be, I believe, admitted into the National Air Hall of Fame, probably in October. And he's also going to enter into the New Jersey Air Hall of Fame around about the same time. So he's finished flying a few years back, but he's still getting awards and being applauded. And I passed this out. My grandson Jack did. We had a chance to look through this 10 or 12 pages of a partial bio of Lieutenant Colonel Robert Vaucher. You can see what he's done. I hope we have some questions for him later. Having said all that, having had a little snack with Bob just a little while ago and helped him bring his plane in, would you please welcome Lieutenant Colonel Robert Vaucher, 117 combat missions in the Pacific in World War II.
Thank you, Woody, for that generous introduction. But you left out one thing, and that's my combat code in World War II in leading missions. And my code was Victor Able, Uncle Charlie, how easy, Roger. Polygon, chicken to the hen house. Now, Victor Able, Uncle Charlie, how easy, Roger spells my name in an international phonetic alphabet. So, that's the source of that. The first thing I should ask is, are there any pilots in the group? Any World War II? World War II? You mean I'm the only World War II guy here?
No, Ed is over there.
No.
But I'm a pilot.
Okay. You're World War II? Okay. I just wanted to get a feel so I could tell how much I could exaggerate this. You indicated that I had less than an hour to relate some of my World War II experiences. That's a real challenge since I was overseas 37 months in a combat heavy bomber unit and flew 117 combat missions, as you already know. I gave a similar talk to the Campground Association in New Jersey at their 4th of July celebration. And 1 minute into my talk, a woman faded. 5 minutes into my talk, another woman faded. The next day, the local newspaper in Somerville, New Jersey, reported that the Washington Campground Association had their annual flag raising ceremony and read the Declaration of Independence, and 2 people faded. That was the result of my talk, I guess. But it was a very hot day. In Tom Brokaw's book, The Greatest Generation, he profiled my generation to a T, who we were, where we came from, where we grew up, and what our values were. President Franklin Roosevelt said in his 1935 inaugural address that some generations are given a lot, some generations are expected to give a lot. This generation, which I was in, and which this young boy here is a freshman, that was when I was a freshman. He said, this generation of Americans has a rendezvous with destiny. I was born and raised on a citrus ranch in a very remote corner of the United States, in the lower Rio Grande Valley of Texas, right along the Mexican border. The valley was provincial and parochial. I really thought that the world was 60 miles long and 15 miles wide. The main highway into the valley from San Antonio, Texas, had a large sign that read, "You are entering Hidalgo County. No federal or state laws apply." We lived 9 miles from the town. We had no electricity, no car, no radio or phone. But we had family and a big troller, horses, mules, cows, chickens, a lot of wildlife. Shopping was a 10-hour ride in a box wagon, 3.5 hours going, 3 hours shopping, 3 hours back home. The shopping rounds were feed store, hardware store, drugstore, post office, grocery store, and the last stop was at the ice house to get a 100-pound block of ice, which was blanketed in the straw in the box wagon. And don't forget the Saturday evening post. Pancho Villa's remnants of Pancho Villa were raiding across the border at that time and taking cattle from the ranches and robbing homes. So we were on the edge of civilization. So what does that have to do with my talk today? A boy growing up in the valley, I could not have imagined in my wildest dream that by the time I was 25 years old, I would fly combat in the North Atlantic, Caribbean, near Pacific, far Pacific, China, and bomb targets in Sumatra, China, Burma, Manchuria, Philippines, Korea, and ultimately Japan. And then have stories to tell for the next 70 years. I have chosen as a theme today, the fog of war. I'll share a personal story that you've never read or heard about. That's just one example of the fog of war is proof that fact is stranger than fiction. At 11 a.m. on the morning of July 4th, 236 years ago, historians proclaimed that one of the most entrepreneurial happenings in the history of mankind took place when the 55 men of the Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence. On July 3rd, the previous day to the Continental Congress, they had learned that 150 of its patented ships were on at Sandy Hook, New Jersey, just off of New York City. They were also informed that a party had gone ashore on Staten Island. The fog of war was at hand. New York City was the most important enemy target, but heavily defended. New Jersey and the Philippines were possible targets, not so well defended. At the same time, the commander of the Continental Army, General Washington, was in Boston, taking over command of the army. So the military game was at play. What if? So from day one of the founding of our great nation, New York City was a prime military target, and as we know with 9/11, it still is. Over time, different methods were developed to defend New York City. When the airplane evolved as a military weapon in the 1930s, Mitchell Field, Long Island, became an air base to protect the skies over New York City, and the B-18 twin-engine bomber was based there to intercept a force up to 500 miles. In the late 30s, the long-range B-17 bomber, prior to the B-29 here, was introduced, so interception could now be 1,000 miles off the shore. The large air base, Westover Field, was built in Springfield, Massachusetts, to defend Boston and New York City, with the B-17 flying fortress. Westover Field was activated in May of 1941, and I was the original cadet. I was a recent pilot graduate from the West Point of the Air, Randolph Field, Texas. And that's what it was called at that time, West Point of the Air. Now fast forward 6 months to Pearl Harbor, December 7, 41. Everyone knows that day, but few know that 6 days later, on Saturday, December 15th, I was to be married. On Saturday, December 6th, the day before Pearl Harbor, my friend, my fiance came down from Somerville, New Jersey to Westover Field, Massachusetts for a pre-wedding party and hosted by my fellow officers. The next day, Sunday, December 7th, Eleanor, my fiance, and I spent the day working in the apartment that we had rented that we were going to move into subsequent to our marriage. At 5 p.m., she drove me back to the base as she was going back to Somerville to prepare for the wedding next Saturday. As we approached the gate, we were flabbergasted to find everybody in full wartime restrictions and all with guns and gas masks at the ready. She dropped me off, and our parting words were, "See you at church next Saturday." Little did we realize that that day, December 7, 1941, was the beginning of an odyssey that lasted 3 years and 9 months for us and the rest of the world. Topic A for everyone on the base that evening was Pearl Harbor. We were not as surprised as you might think, because we had all been briefed for months that if war broke out, the Japanese would strike Manila, Pearl Harbor, and the Panama Canal, either one or all of them. So the prediction was fulfilled at least by an attack on Pearl Harbor. At midnight on that Sunday, my best friend John Rush handed me the leash to the beautiful Dalmatian, explaining that all the B-17s were ordered to leave immediately for the West Coast as they expected an attack there. That was the last time I saw John, as he was killed in a B-17 crash 2 months later. Monday morning, we were ordered to take inventory of our unit's cold weather gear. I was assistant supply officer, and I was still at the task about 9 p.m. on Monday when a military policeman came up to me saying that he had orders from Colonel Matheny to deliver me to the war room. I didn't exactly know what a war room was, and I didn't know there was one on the field. I asked him to take me back to my quarters so I could change from my fatigue to my dress clothes, and he replied, "That was not the colonel's orders." I had the faintest idea that it would be 6 days at night before I got back to my quarters, and that this was the beginning of a 3-year and 1 month of combat duty. Well, I was amazed to see that the 2-story war room had maps of all the world on all the walls, with all the military situations such as Hitler was in Poland and Japanese were in China, and where what the position of all the lines were. Coming down from the North Sea was a red ribbon, and it came about 500 miles off of Long Island, and it had hash marks: Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, December 7th, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 500 miles off of Long Island. I would get to explain that the British Admiralty had reported that one of their submarines had been stalking in the North Sea, the largest German fleet ever assembled, but had lost trail on Thursday when they had to dive for security reasons. In addition, we were briefed that the War Department had knowledge that a freighter reported seeing a warship a few hundred miles off the west coast. So they concluded that there was going to be a coordinated attack on the East Coast and at fleet speed they would arrive on Wednesday or Thursday. Since all our long-range B-17 bombers had been sent out to the West Coast, all we had left was the remnants of the earlier bomber, the twin-engine B-18, which had a 500-mile radius. Our orders were to search out the fleet and drop our bombs on the German ships carrying airplanes. The Germans, the aircraft carriers, they launched their airplanes from decks, and the airplanes landed on water, and they picked them up and put them back on deck. We were told to bomb those, just the ships that had airplanes on it, because those are the ones they expected would attack New York City. Then circle back around and strafe the decks with our guns that came out of the side of the airplane. We all knew that that was not a good bomber tactic. The 5 assembled crews traveled by car some 200 miles to Mitchell Field, Long Island, from our war room in Westwater Field. We were ordered that under no circumstances could we tell anyone about our mission, not even the state police that were escorting us. The fear was that New York City, the population would panic if they knew that there was an attack was possible. We were told that if we had a wreck and had to go to the hospital, in no way tell them what our mission was. We were loaded into 5 Army sedans and escorted by the Massachusetts State Police to the Connecticut border, where we were handed off to the Connecticut State Police. I was assigned as a liaison in the lead car, which had 2-way radio. About midway down the Merritt Parkway to New York City, the police radio crackled, and the Connecticut State Police headquarters forewarned us that we may have a traffic problem when we arrive at the New York State border, because there was an Army brigade coming up from Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, to repel an enemy landing between Bridgeport and New Haven. As a young man, I thought the war really had developed awful fast, much faster than we ever had. We soon met the Army unit carriage with 2.5-gun trucks pulling caissons and loaded with troops. The New York State Police took us to the New York City limit, and the New York City people took over and took us down the West Side Highway. And at that time, I didn't know the West Side Highway from anything. And across Midtown, 42nd Street, through the Queens Midtown Tunnel, and onto Mitchell Field, Long Island. We arrived about 4 a.m. on Tuesday. The entire trip was at high speeds, lights flashing, sirens screaming. We went through red lights, stop signs, toll gates, ran cars off the road, and whatnot. When we arrived at Mitchell Field, we were told there were no bomb sites on the field. The bomber had at that time the bomb site was the famous Northern bomb site. Several hours later, they decided that the bomb sites were at Langley Field, Norfolk, Virginia. Captain Bowden and I were assigned to fly to Langley and retrieve them. We were assigned an experimental B-23 bomber, which neither of us had ever heard of. The crew chief briefed us on the mechanics and agreed to go along with us. Just after takeoff, the plane went into a left turn and could not be corrected with the controls. The crew chief yelled, "I forgot to unlock the rudder." Thankfully, Captain Bowden was a very skilled pilot, and by controlling the engine power, was able to bring the airplane back around and land where we had just taken off. The crew chief jumped out of the airplane, unlocked the rudder, and off we went to Langley Field. We arrived there and there was much to do, and they decided that the bomb sites were at Fort Bragg. It's now victory. We are acutely aware that the Germans might be attacking New York City today or tomorrow. Thursday, we flew off to Fort Bragg to find they knew exactly where the bomb sites were. Eglin Field, Orlando, Florida. A direct route to Eglin Field is mostly over water along the coast off Savannah and Jacksonville. We were tuned into a military broadcast, which had very interesting chatter on it. We listened to a report from a Coast Guard ship about an unidentified airplane approaching the coast. The air controller officer asked why they claimed it was unidentified, and the Coast Guard responded that the airplane was not in the manual of an Allied or enemy airplane. Then a few minutes later, another ship reported the longitude and latitude of an unidentified plane. The air controller reported that they had scrambled a P-40 squadron to intercept, probably out of Savannah. I looked at our chart and discovered the position that was reported was us. I yelled about, holy smokes, they think we are an enemy aircraft. Val immediately contacted the flight controller, but they were suspicious that we were faking our identity. With the information that we were able to give them, they finally decided that we were friends and not foes. A P-40 came up alongside and flew formation with us for a little bit, and finally saluted and pulled off. After that bit of excitement, we arrived at Eglin Field on Friday and loaded the sites for a Saturday return to Mitchell Field. The fog of war is at full steam by now. The entire east coast from Florida to Maine was 0-0 flying conditions. And we didn't have the instrumentation then that you have now, or even a little later. So I went to the movies on my wedding day. Because of the nationwide confusion, it was impossible to make a long-distance call. On the third day, I had realized I would not be back to the wedding and sent a telegram to my best man, who was a student at MIT, and Elder, my fiancée, and I later found that while my best man received the telegram, Elder did not. The fog lifted, and by Sunday we departed for Mitchell Field, arriving about 7 p.m. Now 7 p.m. in the middle of January, in the beginning of January, it's dark, as you know. Of course, wondering ourselves where the German fleet might be. Before we could even go to the bathroom, they crammed 20 special force soldiers in field combat gear into the bomber and ordered us to fly them to Bangor, Maine. Intelligence reports were that Germans had landed on the Maine coast. By this time, New England had a snowstorm in full force, but Val was a very skilled pilot. He was a captain, and he probably had been in 10 years at least to be a captain. Had been flying for a long time and flew a lot of various kinds of airplanes. En route, our right engine blew an exhaust stack, but we knew that if we grounded the experimental airplane in Bangor, which was not an Air Force base, that would be weeks before we get repaired and we'd be stuck up there. So we took a chance and took off for home, Westover Field, home at last. By this time, we had flown an experimental plane from one end of the East Coast to the other without proper training, proper navigation equipment, maps, toothbrush, or a change of clothes. We had experienced a thrilling automobile race ride that Hollywood would be hard to duplicate, and almost was shot down by our own fighters. And most importantly, I missed my wedding. All this in the war was only 7 days old. So what happened to the German fleet? A British reconnaissance plane discovered it off the coast of France, and the British Navy engaged it, wiping out the fleet. And as a result, the Germans had no meaningful surface navy, not counting submarines, surface navy, for the remainder of the war. And it turned out the German fleet was headed for Vaucher to close the gates to the Mediterranean, which would have been a real coup for Hitler if it had occurred. The enemy warship that was spotted off the west coast turned out to be a U.S. Navy ship returning from a trading mission. And we all know that there were no enemy landings on the U.S. shores in Maine or elsewhere. Now, you gave me a limited time here. Can I have a few more minutes to tell you about my wedding?
Yes.
Thank you. When we arrived back at the base, about 11 p.m. Sunday night, I was told that my commanding officer wanted me to call him immediately. I called him and he said, "Your mother-in-law had been driving us crazy trying to find out where you were. And we didn't even know where you were. And she didn't leave us." He told me that I could have 36 hours off, but had to be on base for roll call Tuesday morning at 8 a.m. He added, "The War Department has ordered that all personnel must stay within 20 miles of the base." He knew, however, that I most likely was headed 200 miles to Somerville, New Jersey. I forget I'm not talking to people in New Jersey. Before getting underway, I called my fiancée. Her mother answered and said the elder would not talk to me. When I explained something to her where I had been the last week without revealing what the mission was, she replied, "Bob, I'll take care of Elder. You come on down here and we'll have the wedding arranged by the time you get here." So off to Somerville, arriving at 5 a.m. Monday morning. Elder was relieved to see me, and we were married at St. John's Episcopal Church in Somerville, New Jersey at 11 o'clock on Monday morning. What about the honeymoon? Well, we drove back to Springfield. I made the 8 a.m. Tuesday morning roll call, and at 8:30 I was co-piloting a B-18 bomber and searching for in the Atlantic for the anticipated German Navy. That was the beginning of my 3 years and 1 month of combat duty, which we netted me 117 combat missions and a number of decorations without going into them. As a boy in the lower Rio Grande Valley of Texas, I could not have imagined in my wildest dreams that by the time I was 25 years old, I would fight combat in the North Atlantic, the Caribbean, the Near Pacific, the Far Pacific, China, and bomb targets in Sumatra, China, Burma, Manchuria, Philippines, Korea, and Japan. Lastly, it is fitting to make note of the 400,000 who died in World War II, the 200,000 who died in World War I, the 58,000 who died in Vietnam, the 35,000 who died in Korea, the 5,000 or more who have died in the Middle East that's added to date. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my story for the first 7 days of war. This is Victor Abel, Uncle Charlie, How Easy Roger, over and out. If you have any questions,
Okay.
We want to know about the honeymoon.
I would like to, I've got a gentleman here who flew radar operator in the B-29, and this is my show and tell now. I have a minute for it. This, mixed up at the fire here. The B-17 was called the Flying Fortress, and this was called the Super Fortress. This is half a football field from here to here. That's 149 feet.
Hold it up higher.
It's 96 feet from here.
Bob,
Higher.
hold it
They
up
can't see.
higher. Some of the people. Hold it up higher.
Oh, hold it up higher. I thought.
Give it some altitude.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
It was a super fortress because you could see the bomb bays in there and held 20,000 pounds of bombs, 10 tons of bombs. If we were on a severe fighter opposition mission, we could carry 13,000 rounds of ammunition, 50 caliber, and all of them except there was one cannon in the rear, which was to keep tail people from sneaking up on the tail. So with 12,000 pounds of 50 caliber, you wouldn't want to get too close to this. And that, the Japanese learned that quite early. I flew along many times with the Japanese fighters. This plane was 190 miles an hour. The fighters only went about 190 miles an hour then. The fighters, in order to make an attack, had to get way up ahead of you. But with all the firepower, when you think of, there are 4 50 caliber guns in the nose here, on the top here, and 4 50 caliber on the bottom here, on a head-on attack with a bombing formation of 12 airplanes. That is, this is the lead airplane, this is the highway airplane, this is the low-wing airplane, and this is the slot airplane. And that same slot is up here, that's 8, and another slot there, which is 12 airplanes, 12 times 8, atomic,
96.
total guns, out of 12 airplanes on a head-on attack. Every 5th round of the 50 caliber was a tracer on a head-on attack. Everybody firing at this guy. It was just like a fireworks. So they would attack, and they'd see this tremendous firework, and they'd literally pull off or dive under the airplane. This gentleman over here flew as a radar operator, and that, at least at our time, that was the radar device that picked up everything that the radar operator picked up. And he was in solitary confinement the whole time. The radar operator's office was right in here, no windows or anything. Of course, the bombardier was up here, and the navigator, and the radio operator, and the flight engineer was there. 2 gunners back here. The revolutionary thing about this is not only was it a big, powerful airplane, but it was pressurized. This was the first, this led all the airlines into pressurized airplanes, so they could fly at high altitude and be at no more than 8,000 feet at any one time. The other revolutionary thing was, in the B-17, the gunner literally had the gun with a gun sight on it, and he had to hold it out in the slipstream and then also aim. This airplane, the gunner had a sight, all he had was a sight, and these guns rotated by servo control, and if he sighted something over there, these guns would go over there, wherever his sight was. So that these are all remote controlled guns except the tail gunner. The tail gunner still had a sight type of control. Yet this airplane flattened Japan long before, I think long in the wartime, a month is a long time. 2 months before the atomic bomb dropped, Japan was so beaten that we dropped leaflets over the town 2 days ahead and told them that we were going to bomb them. And because we had no opposition, they were out of gas, they were out of food, they were dead in the water. We had with B-29, there's 12,000 mines in all the waterways of Japan. Japan Congress depends very much the way it's built, and it's an island, really an island. They couldn't navigate. They were actually, they controlled Korea. They were actually dropping off barrels of rice in Korea because there was a stream, a Gulf Stream, or not a Gulf Stream, ocean stream that would carry those 55-gallon drums to the shore of Japan, across the China Sea, and they were that bad off shipping-wise. Now, anybody have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, sir. Thank you. When you flew the mission out of Tinian, did you notice any secured areas while you were there, or while you were getting up into the air, into your air pattern?
Can you interpret it for me?
When you were flying out of Tinian Air Base, did you notice any secure areas when you were getting up into your pattern? I assume you're thinking about the atomic bomb attack.
Yes.
Atomic bomb. So did you know that they were going to be flying the Enola Gay out of Tinian?
No, that unit came on base right at the end of July, in June. They came on the island, and they were a special group of 29s, and the story was they had a new 10,000-pound bomb, one bomb, and they had the bomb base built special to carry this 10,000-pound bomb, and it was just another extension of what we were already doing. So we didn't know that it was an atomic bomb. Yes, ma'am.
Did you ever meet Colonel Tibbets?
Did I?
Tibbets.
I'm sorry, Tibbets.
Tibbets. Did you ever meet Colonel Tibbets?
Oh, yes.
You did? Okay. I have one more question. When you flew the 529 planes over the USS Missouri at the peace signing, or the surrender signing actually, where did you land everybody? There's not a lot of room over there.
They all went back home.
They did?
Yeah.
Bob, explain what air bases you flew out of when you went up to the Missouri. I know you came out of Tinian, but what other bases did the planes come out of? Bob, on that flight, Bob was the lead flight commander. He was in the lead plane. He was personally chosen by General MacArthur. And he was told, in no uncertain terms, that when MacArthur finished signing the document, whatever that was going to be, I guess they had it all pretty well timed out, that from Tinian to the USS Missouri, he had to hit the dime spot over MacArthur's head. And he hit it, right? So where did you go? So you now, what other bases did they come from? I know they came from...
We flew out. MacArthur was a traditionalist as a military person. And in time past, whenever an army was defeated, they very often performed what they called a show of force. The victor would dress up in everything they had, and the defeated would be put on the sideline, and they would march troops after troops after troops by the ball with all their armament. This was to make the defeated realize maybe we should have, we probably did the right thing. It's called a show of force. Well, MacArthur, the peace treaty was signed on a battleship in Tokyo Bay, so you couldn't perform that kind of thing. And MacArthur asked the Air Force if they could fly some airplanes over. And LeMay was head of the 20th Air Force, the unit I was in. And at that time we had just reached our 1,000 B-29s on Tinian, Saipan, and Guam. But all 1,000 weren't in commission at any one time, so not 1,000 could go on a mission. But the most we ever had on a mission was I led a mission of 450, which was the largest in-trail combat mission that was over Yokohama. In-trail meaning that you had formation after formation behind one another, and each one dropped bombs on the same target as they went over. That was 450 400 some odd planes in that fair. But what was the question of? So we're talking about flying over the battlefield. MacArthur asked LeMay what he could do, and he said, I'll put every commission B-29 over the battleship when you sign the treaty. So this was all the treaty affair, like any military affair, was all scripted. 9/17 was when MacArthur was to put his signature on, and all the other signatories signed up, and then MacArthur was the last one, and that was 9/17, and I was told, that's one target time you better not miss, and we did miss it. And I have a beautiful picture which hangs in some of the museums. I had a reporter from the Chicago Tribune on board, and he had a camera like this lady, young lady here, and he took a picture just as we went over, and it's a beautiful picture of the battleship and soldiers and sailors all hanging off the every part of the ship, and there's this peace party in the center of it. And if you see some of the one Path A newsreel, if you see that, you will see MacArthur sit down and sign, and then he puts the pen down, and he gets up and he looks up, and at that time the airplane started going over it, and it's a very good scene, and every time I look at it, I think, well, I was in that airplane, that's the first one. But how I got to be that, a General Ravy was assigned the job to be air commander of the whole fleet. And I had sort of been General Ravy's private pilot. Anytime he wanted to go anywhere, he was commanding officer general of the 58th Wing. He'd call up and he'd say, Vaucher, I gotta go down to Guam tomorrow. I'll be at the airplane at 9 o'clock, and I get an airplane and fly him down. And I flew over to Ewo and some of them in another island. And so he picked me as a pilot for that airplane, the lead airplane. He didn't fly the airplane, he wasn't air commander, he was General Ravy wasn't going to fly the airplane. And I'm not even sure he could fly it. But when 2 days before the peace treaty was signed, somebody realized that General Ravy had been in combat longer than any other single general other than MacArthur, and that he ought to be on the peace party on board ship. So they said, get your tail up to Tokyo. So off to Tokyo it went, and he said, oh Shane, you know, I knew what all the orders were, how we were going to assemble all these airplanes from all the different islands. He said, you know the whole thing, you're the leader. So I was happened to be at the right place at the right time. That happens in so many things in our life. Well, that's how that came off.
So Bob, how old were you when you flew over the Missouri?
How old was I when?
When you flew over the Missouri?
24. That makes me 95. I'm more 95 than I am 94.
Bob, explain to the crowd, it's not too much, pretty early. Explain to the crowd, Bob flew the first air attack over Japan after Jimmy Doolittle's raid. You flew the next American attack over Japan, is that correct? I'm hoping this because I'm just saying.
I flew the next one.
You flew the next air attack over Japan after Jimmy Doolittle attack.
Oh,
you were the next
I was on the
flyer to come over the
first strategic bombing mission of Japan.
After Doolittle.
The Doolittle thing was a terrific thing, but it wasn't. It was a wake-up call for Japan and a tremendous stimulant for our population here. I mean, the reaction to it was that Japan is not invincible, but they were invincible because the only way we could do that is fly some airplanes off of the aircraft carrier to get there. And it wasn't until this came along that we could fly directly and bomb Japan strategically.
And you flew the last bombing attack over Japan before the surrender, right?
The show of force mission that I led was listed as a bombing mission,
But
as a combat mission.
the one before that, you flew the last actual bombing mission. Didn't you hit some kind of rail yards or mine, some kind of factory, something? You flew the last actual bombing attack over Japan.
Oh, yeah.
Tell us about that. That was good.
But Bill here flew radar operator in the Korean War, which I think is quite interesting. It's a different kind of war. Matter of fact, I bombed 2 targets in Korea and Shan, which was a big steel mill. I don't know whether you bombed the same thing. The communists had, the Japanese had at that time. But for you historians, I'm on an email list of about 200. Most of them are B-29 crew members, and it used to be a list of about 3,000 World War II guys are dying off at the rate of 800 a day right now. But this email list, somebody will ask a question. Like I asked a question, I had forgotten how many rounds we would carry if we were maximum. And I put the question out last Friday, and I got answers over the weekend from gunners, people that had to do. I didn't have anything. Pilot, command pilot, didn't have anything to do with getting the bombs off, or the ordnance people did that. The gunners were in charge of seeing that the guns were loaded. And you didn't travel with 12,000 rounds on every mission. Only a very, very special mission. You got down to as low as 100 rounds per gun, which would be 13 guns, 1,300 rounds instead of 12,000. And that would be on a night mission where you had very little opposition, or none other than aircraft. I got shot up very badly over Kobe, Japan. I was leading our group, not leading the whole thing, but leading I was leading. And my deputy, you always had in a flight of that many airplanes, you had a deputy commander and a second in command. The deputy commander was flying wing here, and my deputy commander was flying up here in what we call a high echelon. And just before bombs away, this airplane just shook, and I knew we were hit badly by enemy aircraft. But we completed it. My deputy commander pulled out and went down, and we saw 8 parachutes open, and my second in command went down. Shorty Hull was his name, and his father was an admiral in the Navy. He landed, they parachuted out and landed near an Army post, and the story was that they had a court-martial, and they were all beheaded. The fellow that did get out, so. And my commanding officer was shot down on our second mission, and the Japanese were brutal. The higher you rank, the harder they treated you. The Germans were just the opposite. I had friends that were shot down in Germany, and they were captains, and they lived in a country club. But the lower rank lived in a different kind of quarters. But the Japanese, the higher you rank, the worse you were treated. My commanding officer, after he was in Tokyo Bay in a prisoner of war camp, and he told the story that he and another Colonel Gurney, who I also knew, were assigned buddies, and their duty was to canoe in every morning, and they had to pick up night water from the street, and they had it in a big container on a pole, and he said that they got so good that they could almost trot without spilling any of it. That's the kind of treatment he got at the West Point graduate.
Okay, Bob? One interesting thing that, I mean, I'm not a pilot, I was in the Air Force, but I never flew anything. But one interesting thing that's in your bio, was it the LeMay who developed the lead pilot program where they took certain pilots, trained them up to be the lead guys, usually the first guys in, everybody followed them, and you were part of that program of the lead pilot school and how effective it was in the Pacific?
That was a tactic that LeMay developed in Europe, out of England. When the B-17s first started bombing Germany, the accuracy of the bombing was terrible. We have subsequent bomb. Each bombardier would drop the bombs according to his idea of where they ought to be dropped. He found that by selecting a particular bombardier who was really, really good, like being a quarterback on a football team, he would be in the lead plane, and all the other airplanes, when he opened his bomb bay doors, all the other airplanes opened their bomb bay doors. When they saw the bomb drop, they dropped. They didn't do their own aiming. None of the other airplanes did their own aiming. And that increased the accuracy of bombing tremendously. And so to do that, when they developed what he called lead crew, and he'd pick out, he would, commanding Ferris, he would pick out the best pilot, the best co-pilot, the best flight engineer, the best navigator, the best bombardier. The whole crew was the best in the whole thing, and they were the lead crew. And then you went to lead crew school and learned how to attack, what a tactic was. But that changed the whole tactic of heavy bombardment.
Any other questions or anything? Okay, Bob, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Because I want to give you this.